Hello, and welcome to the John Burt Leadership Podcast. If you're listening to this podcast, most likely you're interested in enhancing your leadership skills to navigate the disruptive changes that you face every day. I'm your host, John Burt, an executive leadership coach. My aim is to provide you with new insights and a fresh perspective on leadership through conversations with my incredible guests, sharing thoughts, ideas, and experiences on leadership. My hope is that this will enable you to contribute, to grow and adapt and become a more impactful leader, ultimately contributing to making your organization and the world a better place. So let's dive in. Today's episode is about mindsets, mindset mastery, and empowering leadership growth and performance. Organizations globally invest approximately $400 billion a year in leadership development initiatives. However, research in human capital reveals that 75% of those organizations consider their leadership development programs not very effective. So, what causes this discrepancy or this disconnect? Experts suggest that the main reason lies in the tendency of most leadership development efforts to neglect the cognitive aspects of how leaders think, learn, and behave, or essentially their mindsets. Mindsets function as the mental lens or filters through which leaders absorb information, enabling them to make sense of and navigate the situations they confront. In essence, mindsets shape the actions of leaders and provide insights into the reasons behind their decisions. My guest today is Christina Zini, a successful leadership coach and light liberator. Listen in as we explore how mindsets impact a leader's effectiveness and performance. Hello, and welcome to the podcast today. My guest today is Christina Zini, an exceptional women's leadership coach. I'm really thrilled to have you on the podcast. You and I are both leadership coaches, and we like talking about leadership. And the topic today, which you and I connected on, is around mindsets and how leadership mindsets can drive growth and performance in leaders. Now, you and I know each other. We've had some history. We met years ago when we were both working in the Netherlands, of all places, two American expats working in the Netherlands at IBM. And I've always found you to be, highly intelligent, curious, compassionate, empathetic person, and also somebody who really believes in empowering women. And so much of what we'll talk about today is also from a female's perspective. What are those mindsets as a female leader that will be helpful for you? So, since you and I know each other, I know our guests don't know you, so I would like to just read a little bit from your bio, just so they get a feel for who you are. So, Christina Zini is a leadership coach with over 25 years of experience in coaching and developing people and driving transformational change. She built a successful career as a management consultant and a professional development leader with PwC and IBM. Her passion for helping people, particularly women, advance in their careers and elevate their leadership is what prompted her to launch her own leadership coaching firm, She Dreams Big, over a decade ago. Self-described light liberator, Christina helps her clients deepen their self-awareness, unlock their potential, and amplify their leadership presence. A proud mom of three, Christina and her family currently live and reside in Houston, Texas. Welcome, Christina.
Thanks again.
Absolutely. So this is a fascinating topic, and like you said, we both have talked about it, and I think part of our own personal journey is part of how we got here in terms of the mindsets that we need as leaders. And I think that over time, I've found that I've developed certain mindsets as a leader that have helped me, and there's been an evolution in that to have a kind of a growth mindset, if you will, but a number of other types of mindsets. How about yourself? How did you come to embrace this topic?
Yeah, thank you for asking that powerful question. I was thinking back on this topic as I was preparing for today's discussion, and I was actually brought back to my teenage years when I was full of like teenage angst. And just as a kid, I was a natural leader as a kid. I was always putting myself out there. I actually loved to be on stage. Um, had opinions and perspectives and was definitely like an outspoken young woman, right? Internally, though, I had a lot going on, a lot of big feelings, like a lot of the typical teenage challenges. And it was actually at that point in my life that I really started to explore just the power of mindset and realize how my mind could be my worst enemy or my best friend. And so I think what really started for me was just coming up with like a few mantras, doing some visualization, writing in my journal, just all the sort of really basic tools. But for a teenage girl experiencing all the teenage girl things, like that was really my first foray into mastering my own mindset. And it's what set the stage for, where I am today, because I really started to understand that our mindset is like, the foundational element from which everything blossoms and grows. So I look at it as almost like the soil in a garden, and that we need to be very intentional and purposeful as to how we like, nourish the soil and care for that soil, because from there, that's where we can grow in our leadership capabilities and our performance and really make a difference in the world.
Yeah, I really like that analogy. And the leader's mindset not only drives their own performance, but it also will drive the performance of their organization, because it really just a leader's responsibility is to help to develop the culture of the organization as well. So the idea that I think how you described it with the soil, I think helps leaders understand that it is something that you can develop over time. It just requires nourishment in order to grow it. It's not something you just automatically obtain. So this is another good element around coaching. Do you have a particular thought in terms of the connection between the leaders' values and character, the mindsets that they have, and the behaviors that they display?
Yeah, well, I feel like the mindset, those internal values and mindset is again what influences then how we're showing up, right? And sometimes there's a disconnect where we find ourselves as leaders thinking, well, I do value connection and courage and compassion, but yet the way I'm behaving, like I'm showing up and I'm just stressed and crabby and I'm really hard on the people around me. And so that's a great moment for us as leaders to become very self-aware of like how we can just disconnect. Perhaps it's influenced by stress, or maybe there's something going on in our personal lives, or it's just the world events that are taking its toll on us, and be able to check in and really reconnect with those values and what's important to us, and then modify our own behavior so that we really show up as that calm, grounded, confident leader that people are looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, most definitely. I think that I believe that the mindsets are what kind of drives a leader's behavior. So if you don't get the mindsets right, then the behaviors are going to be off. Whether you have a controlling behavior, or you tend to be kind of a micromanager, whatever those behaviors tend to come off to the people, it's because you have a mindset that's driving that behavior. So if you get those mindsets right, then the behaviors will naturally follow. And you bring up a very important point, and that is that leaders need to be able to recognize, right, have kind of a self-awareness about the behaviors, and then get kind of deep as to what's caused that behavior. What is the mindset that I have? Do I have a fixed mindset, or am I thinking that the employees are somehow defective, or bad individuals, and that's what's driving my behavior to kind of overemphasize certain types of characteristics.
Yeah, absolutely. Personally, I'm very influenced by Dr. Brene Brown's work around
Mm-hmm.
daring leaders. I'm also influenced by Shirzad Chamine, who is the founder of the positive intelligence concepts, and there are a number of others. And when I think about these different l- leadership mindsets, like scarcity versus abundance, or finite versus infinite, or the growth mindset versus a fixed mindset. To me, it's really coming down to like a very core element. It's like, are we leading from a place of fear, or are we leading from like place of love and possibility. And so when I think about leaders adopting like a coach's mindset, it is that mindset of just openness, expansiveness, possibility, of curiosity, right? Of realizing like that there are so many infinite possibilities that there's sometimes, not necessarily a right or wrong, but there's room to play with and room to explore and to bring everyone in, to that conversation to figure out what does feel like the right next step for us as a team or as an organization.
Yeah. Well, in terms of tips, you just mentioned one of them. To develop that growth mindset. Of course, we as coaches, we tend to work on with our clients. I think of the idea of starting with that self-awareness, Christina. So, leaders who come to me, one of the first things we work on is some self-awareness exercises to help them to get in touch with the values and the principles and maybe the reference points that they have in terms of their past, in terms of what's driving those mindsets, so they become more self-aware of them, and then they can, from that point, you can act on them. Any other tips you can think of that in terms of how do you get started toward the growth mindset?
Yeah, well, like you said, about self-awareness, I'm just a big fan of even self-assessments, of just taking time every day to intentionally check in
Mm-hmm.
with yourself about, how are you feeling as you're starting your day? What do you want to keep in mind as you go about your day? How do you want to show up? And literally, like asking yourself that as you're starting your workday and you're looking at your schedule ahead, and being able to close the day and also reflect back. So this is a point where you can just take a moment to take stock and appreciate,
Mm-hmm.
what were your wins? What did you do well? What did you feel great about?
Mm-hmm.
And then also look at, you know, gosh, I just didn't handle that conversation really well.
Yeah.
What did I learn from that? What's the gift in that moment, right? Give yourself some grace, and be able to, put that on your list of things you're going to let go of, right? You learn from it and you let go of it.
Yeah, some great advice, and I love that idea of looking for the gift in something versus all the problems, because we do have a negative bias in kind of our psyche, human beings, right? I think we look for like what needs to get fixed, but this idea of looking for whatever the gift is, how can you turn that into a positive, is really a great element for leaders to think about. So I want to shift a little bit, Christina. I know you're a women's coach, so I want to
Mhm.
talk about the mindsets and maybe what are the typical mindsets that you find with women leaders, and how do you work with them?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And I just want to point out that while I'm talking about women executives and women leaders that I work with, I recognize that men, people who are non-binary, may also be experiencing some of these same struggles, challenges, fixed mindset. So I just want to be conscious of that. I think that there's probably something we can all relate to in what I'm about to share. The first is imposter syndrome.
Mhm.
And imposter syndrome is just this feeling of like you're in a situation and you're looking around and you're like, I kind of feel like a fraud here. Like, how did I get here? I'm not as great as these people are. Like, I didn't go to an Ivy League school, or I haven't worked for 30 years, or, you're constantly comparing
Mhm.
yourself and thinking that you're an imposter in the situation that you're in, rather than really owning and recognizing, your own leadership capabilities. This is very common for women
Yeah.
and for people of color, right? That said, I know plenty of men who have experienced it too, and maybe for
Mhm.
it's a different reason. Like when you were a young consultant starting up and you walked into a client, and they're like, "What can he know? He's just a young guy straight out
Yes.
of school." Right? That
Yes. Yes.
happens, right? Happened to me, happened to you, I'm sure as well. So that's a big one, imposter syndrome. Another one that I really hear a lot from my clients and recently read about is just this feeling of like never quite right. And for us women leaders, it's this feeling of like, well, I'll use age as another example. She's too young. Or on the flip side, like, well, she's just now she's too old. She's not quite right. And it's this whole feeling of like gosh, I'm damned if I do and I'm damned if I don't. Whatever I do is just not quite right in the way that I'm showing up as a leader, and I'm trying to, be assertive and be ambitious. Well, that's not quite right. And that kind of segues into the second or third problem that I often hear, which is around the likability dilemma, right? So, as women leaders, oftentimes I think women are just naturally like very relationship oriented, and many of us are big time pleasers, myself included, right? So we're approaching our leadership role of, you know, wanting to lead and also wanting to be liked and wanting to bring people around with us. But as we know, as leaders, we have to make those hard decisions. We have to deal with conflict, have hard conversations. And that puts us in a situation where, sometimes, we're drawing from more masculine style of leadership traits, like being more assertive, or demonstrating our ambition. And what happens when women are basically expressing certain masculine, traditionally masculine traits is that their likability factor goes down. They're kind of like punished for it. And, you kind of hear that anecdotally when people talk about a woman leader being like too bossy. Like she's cold, she's bossy, right? And it's really, if you compared her to a male leader who is displaying some of those same traits and characteristics, he wouldn't be judged in the same way. And then lastly, I'd also like to just call attention to another theme that I hear a lot from the women leaders I coach, the mental load of caregiving, right? And often, especially for women like me, we're in this sandwich generation, right? Where we still have young children at home and we have aging parents. And, as women leaders, we're still carrying a lot of the mental load, even when we have help, even when we've set up in a support system. That's just constantly on our minds as we think about our kids, and do they have what they need for school, or what about for the upcoming holidays, and what's going on, with my dad, and he's not been feeling well, and is he getting the care that he needs? So those are the four big ones.
Okay, well, thanks for sharing those, because I think it's very important for our listeners to understand there are unique struggles or challenges that women leaders do face in the workplace. So if you think about how do you kind of find the breakthroughs, right? How do you break out of those mindsets as women leaders? Are there any specific approaches you use?
Yeah, well, obviously, it all comes back to mindset, right? So, oftentimes, when I describe myself as a women's leadership coach, I explain to people, like, really what I'm doing is mindset coaching, right? So, I use an example of a client that I'm working with at present. She's a very ambitious HR professional. She's already quite seasoned into her career in a high level HR position, and she has the goal of becoming a CHRO someday. And so she also has two young kids, and she's caught, in this quandary of like, well, this is my professional goal, and I'd really like to work towards becoming CHRO. And she's got a lot of great reasons for why she wants to play at that level. But I also have a family, and I don't want to sacrifice that. I feel like the higher up I go, the more of my work life that I have to sacrifice. And so as a coach, for me, it's really like zeroing in on some of those narratives that she's telling herself, mm-hmm. and some of those limiting beliefs. And so what I hope to do and unlock in my coachees who have those ambitions of really reaching like the C-suite level is really helping them see all the possibilities, mm-hmm. right? And then helping them identify, okay, what is the support structure I want to put in place? What are the boundaries also that I want to set for myself? That as a leader, I want to say, you know what? I'm not going to work late in the evenings or on weekends. I'm going to show up, for my children. I'm not going to make that, just a habit. So I'll stop there and see what you're thinking as I share this example.
No, I think that it's incredible in terms of helping them find the pathway, right? And I agree with you that the limiting beliefs that people have about themselves causes them to make choices that may or may not be based upon the reality, right? So helping them to kind of really thread through that understanding what their ambitions are, and then what is real and what's not real. I love the idea of like setting boundaries, right? So that if you are going to step through that door, you're going to take this pathway, you understand where you're going to set the boundaries, right? So you're really very clear about that going in. I think that this is great advice, and of course, as a women's coach, I understand you very successful in this area. So kind of back to the topic about the mindsets for leaders. And if you think about, there's so many different mindsets that we've talked about already, the growth mindset, positivity, but are there other mindsets that come to mind for you in terms of what you think makes a great leader?
Hmm. I just keep coming back to, some fundamentals around like empathy, sensitivity, vulnerability.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd just love to quickly share that yesterday I was at the Texas Conference for Women,
Mm-hmm.
and I had the pleasure of listening to the former Prime Minister of New Zealand, Jacinda Ardern, speak. And she actually shared such a powerful anecdote. It's something that I will be holding with me and sharing with my clients as I go forward. That she just fell into this role as a party leader and then became the Prime Minister of New Zealand, not because she had those political ambitions. She just was playing a deputy role. And then the party leader stepped down and everybody looked at her and she was like, who, me?
Yeah.
I'm far too, empathetic. I'm far too sensitive to take on this role. So she was already telling herself, right? Like, I'm not really up for this. But anyway, it happened. Obviously, like she did become Prime Minister of New Zealand, and she had a conversation with a colleague of hers. She turned to him and she kind of looked at him as a role model of like this toughness, like this tough exterior. So she was like, hey, how do I like toughen up? And he said to her, don't.
Mm.
Your empathy and your sensitivity that's your superpower.
Mm-hmm.
And you need to hold on to that. You need to lean into that. That is what helps you connect with people and see the world through their eyes and through their experiences. And so it was actually that conversation that helped her turn her own mindset around and really see her empathy and her sensitivity as a strength.
Mm-hmm.
And now we know that's really on brand for her, and she's really built a name for herself as this different kind of leader that showed up with that empathy and that sensitivity and that vulnerability. So even after she stepped down as prime minister, she's now in the public speaking circuit, really sharing her message and
Mm-hmm.
helping women in particular, like just own those strengths and step into their space.
Yeah, it seems like the old style, right? The 20th century style was kind of the tough guy, kind of John Wayne, or just a very tough leader. And we still see it in films and those types of things where these are being praised as being a great leadership style. But I think in today's 21st century leader, right, there are so many new challenges where empathy and vulnerability really are the keys to unlocking the potential of yourself as well as the team you're in. So I think that really helps people to understand that there has been an evolution in terms of not only the business challenges that the people face, economy, the employee workforce, the technology that we're all dealing with, but just in terms of how we treat people, that has certainly changed. One of the things that I remember from the work that I did with leaders at IBM and PwC was this idea of getting them to think more boldly and maybe differently in order to set their mark, right? What is your big idea, if you will, as a leader? So as a leader, I think that it's important that you are able to come up with some bold expression of what it is you think needs to happen, what needs to change, what needs to be better, what it needs to be created. And if you think back to like a Steve Jobs type of personality, Steve Jobs was this, most of you remember, creator of Apple, right? When he created Apple, right, he was really ridiculed by other tech leaders, the IBMs and the PC manufacturers at the time. This is well before the iPhone, but just this concept that he came up with, he was really ridiculed with that, but he really believed he had this bigger idea about user interface and user satisfaction on a product and creating this unique mark. And he didn't waver from that. He continued to pursue it. So that's the type of thing where I think a lot of leaders today miss the mark, not having sort of a bold expression of what difference they're going to make in the world, and being willing to step out and maybe cut against the grain, be a little bit different than the others that are around them. Any others, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, what you're sharing, John, is a wonderful example of that finite versus infinite mindset, right? And I was just listening to a podcast actually with Simon Sinek, and he talked about that exact same story, right? About Steve Jobs, and then even the pivot that Apple had been investing so much money, in particular technology, and after he, saw another technology with the user interface, he was like, nope, we're going to pivot. We're going to go in a different direction. And that's what created the iPhone. And I mean,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
enough said, right? So there is that, like, that agility, that ability to, like, really just hone in on something, and the courage to, do an about face, to turn the ship around, right? And that takes certainly, like, that daring leadership.
Yeah.
And it also takes, like, curiosity. So that's another
Mm.
form of mindset that I just want to touch on for a moment, which is, I like to think about it as like embodying this, like, fascinated anthropologist, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I do this as well, even in my personal life, when you just are taking things in and noticing, and being curious, and it's asking questions and being willing to drill down even a little bit more. And so that's both a tool to help, people to, like, basically identify a problem and solve a problem, but also to bring people on board. It's just staying open and curious. And that's, an element of that growth and learner's mindset that we talked about earlier.
Yeah, some really great points. I think that one of the other things that I've seen is, for leaders anyway, is having a real interest in the success of other people. Right. I think
Mm-hmm.
in many, the leaders that are duty focused, organizational focused, or mission purpose focused, tend to do well. But I think where it really comes together is when you're really thinking about how are you going to bring the team along? How are you going to elevate people within the team to be able to work at their very best and show the interest in their success? And it really kind of, as you said, if you combine that curiosity to try to figure out what each and every one of your team members can bring to the table, you have a really rich mixture
Mm-hmm.
to power through most
Mm-hmm.
of today's challenges. But this idea of caring for others and what the success of others is, I think a lot of people get concerned that
Mm-hmm.
that people are going to get too mushy, and it's going to be too touchy feely. But in reality, right, we're really talking about helping them to be successful, taking them as a whole person, all their flaws, right? Because everybody's got them, right? Take their flaws and all of their gifts and strengths, but use that, bring it into and integrate it into a pursuit of the mission.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you sparked another idea in my head as you were talking, which is really about going back to vulnerability, about how, as leaders, we need to role model that for the people around us. And that is also in part about showing up with that curious mindset, because vulnerability, it doesn't mean that you're sharing all the intimate details of your life. It is, though, about, letting people see your true self, admitting your shortcomings, like telling people, hey, you know what? I didn't handle that conversation very well. Like, I'd like to just talk with you a little bit more, make a repair, see how we can move forward together. It's about admitting when you've made a mistake, or things didn't go as you had hoped and expected to go. What can you learn from that? So being vulnerable in those moments, and then admitting when you don't know, right? Just saying, actually, I don't know, and leveraging the people around you. Say, could you tell me more about that? Or you've got that skill set. Could you show me how to do this? Right.
Mhm.
And that really brings people in and lifts people up. Right. So when I think about leadership now, it is very different from the way that it was 10, 20 years ago. you often think about leaders really like being in the spotlight, and maybe it feels egocentric and they're like, the ones garnering all the attention. But I really think about leadership as being a selfless act. It is really about putting almost other people and the greater good, as priority, right? And that you're there as a leader, to inspire, to evoke, to support, to guide. So those to me are just the leadership qualities of what we need today and what's going to take us into the future.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, right there, if you put yourself out there, there is going to be critique, right? And sometimes
Oh
that
yeah.
and sometimes that triggers the inner critic in you, right? And you start to maybe believe a little bit of that. So it's a very, very nasty cycle. You hear criticisms of the ideas or the approach. But that's what leads us to this idea about resilience, right? And adaptability. Two very important points for a leader as well. You have to, have that ability to just be committed to your ideas and the long-term goal. Believe that it's good for the overall organization, not just something that you want to do, but something that's going to give benefit to the organization. But then, being adaptable. Not every step you take is going to get you directly from. I heard this the other day. Right? You don't go directly from A to B in life, right? It's going to be A to L or M or whatever, and it's going to be circles and stop off points. And but if you ultimately understand where you want to go and you have that resilience to know that eventually you're going to get to a good place, then it helps. It helps for leaders to have that mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a big believer in that, just that we have to constantly like nurture our own inner soil, right? Our mindset. And
Mm-hmm.
when we nurture it, so when we spend time just really caring for ourselves, our mental health, our physical health, doing what we need to do to like recharge our batteries so that we can lead from like that calm, grounded, confident space,
Mm-hmm.
that enables us to be more resilient and to be
Mm-hmm.
more adaptable, right? Because we're not running on empty. And so often, what I see with all my clients is that they just run from meeting to meeting to
Mm-hmm.
meeting, right? And then they get to the end of the day and they're just exhausted, right? They've
Mm-hmm.
not taken any time during the day to recharge their batteries and so forth. And that's why, as I mentioned a little while ago, I feel like the bookends of the day are so important, to be intentional as you start the day and be intentional as you end the day. And then in the middle of the day, as you're between meetings, giving yourself what you need to kind of nourish yourself, and constantly kind of like bringing your mind back to that like place of calm, centeredness, positivity inside of you. And I just want to be clear, this isn't about like toxic positivity and like, disconnecting or disassociating from your emotions. That's not what it is, not what it's about. It's just really about helping you not get stuck, right, in the overwhelm or the anxiety or the fear, but coming back to that place of calm. So there's a few little tips that I'll share with you that I think have helped my
Please.
clients and certainly helped me, um, which is just in between meetings, taking a couple of minutes to take a breath, have a sip of water. If you're in a meeting and things are getting heated up, you feel like you're stuck, maybe the discussion isn't going anywhere, just even looking out the window, right? Just change your perspective. Or maybe you turn a traditional meeting that you have with a one-to-one into a walking meeting, right? Where you just like, hey, let's step outside, or if you're on Zoom, perhaps you're taking a moment just to check in personally, like what's going on outside of work, what's showing up for you now, or what's challenging you. So even just like mixing it up, I know it seems so obvious, but just doing something that really connects you back like to your senses, and helps like bring that calm, helps you connect with the humanity and the people around you, makes a world of difference.
Mhm. Well, thank you, Christina. I appreciate it. We've had a really great discussion today. It was everything I'd hoped for in terms of being able to talk about mindsets. And I think that some of the tips that we've discussed for our clients in terms of self-awareness and working on those mindsets, finding those breakthroughs in terms of the limiting beliefs, are all very, very important elements. Now, you and I are both coaches, so I want to make sure that our listeners are able to reach us if they are interested in talking to us more about these subjects. Can you tell the listeners how they can get a hold of you, Christina?
Sure, you can find me on LinkedIn as Christina Zini. There's only one of me in this world,
Okay.
and that's Christina with a CH, just to be clear. I'm also on Facebook and Instagram by the same name, so I'd love to hear from you.
Okay, fantastic, Christina, and I hope that they do get in touch with you. I'm John Burt. I'm reachable at johnburtleadership.com. And we're going to go ahead and put all the information on the contact for both Christina and myself in the notes for this podcast. I want to thank you once again, Christina. This is fantastic. You've been a good friend. You're a great leader, great coach. And I'm just so happy that we're able to do this and capture it for posterity. So thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's been a delight being here. I really appreciate the opportunity, and I hope that your listeners were able to take away some great tips that they can use on a day to day basis and just some inspiration that will lift them up when times are tough.
All right. Listen, folks, tune in to our next podcast, John Burt Leadership Podcast. We're going to be talking to Al Fragnoli. We're going to be talking about resilience. Al's had some challenges that he's been able to overcome in his recent work and life, and I wanted to bring that to our listeners. So please tune in to the next. Go out and listen on the podcast, please. Rate us, tell us how well we did. We love the feedback in terms of whether or not we're bringing the right topics and we're hitting the right notes. So please go ahead and add your comments. So thanks again. Talk to you soon. Well, I hope you enjoyed that fascinating podcast with Christina Zini, a leadership coach, a women's leadership coach, and self-described light liberator. Fascinating discussion around mindsets and the mindsets that are essential for a leader to perform at their best. So thank you so much for listening in. Please rate us and give us some feedback if you can on as you listen to this podcast. And we look forward to having you listen in next time. Thank you.